Saguli Swagwag. Today I'm joined by Rick Hill and Tim Johnson, two individuals who have been instrumental in transforming the Mohawk Institute from a site of trauma into a heritage museum and an international site of conscience. As we mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we're discussing how their efforts honor survivors and deepen public understanding of Canada's residential school legacy. Tim Johnson, I'm gonna start with you, and I'd like to know how your personal journey has shaped you and led you to this moment where you're doing this very important unveiling on September 30th.
Well, probably two tracks. On the professional side, both Rick and I, have worked in the museum field for quite some time. Both of us as senior managers at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of the American Indians. So kind of at this stage in our lives, working on this significant legacy project was of great personal or professional interest. On the personal side, my wife, Lisa, was raised by her grandmother, who spent most of her young life at the Mohawk Institute. And so this, how that has come down through the family has been very interesting to us. And also, the kind of rollout of the survivors and what became of their lives and what they did has impacted us as well. Don Hill, one of the survivors from Six Nations, ultimately became a teacher and ended up teaching both of our children at Emily C. General School at Six Nations. So, it's part of the community, and it's such a powerful story that it was really important to get involved.
Thank you for that, Tim. Rick, you spent so much of your life really researching and working and dedicating so much time to the Mohawk Institute and to sharing this story. Can you tell our listeners why this is so important?
Well, it's kind of a newfound story in my life, meaning that you didn't grow up hearing about these things. Even in my relatives who went there, it was the unspoken conversation that united us together. So tapping into that, I actually worked for the Woodland Cultural Center in 1973, and I stayed in the old dorms. The beds were still there. I had no idea what the school was about. But once I was hired to do an exhibition, and by the way, they gave me 9 months to do it, I was frantically trying to learn the history and digging through the archives. And I also realized this was a huge, huge project. So I enlisted a number of my historian friends to help me out. What do we know about this place? What's the missing information? What do the survivors have to tell us? And then what can we do as curators to make sense out of this whole long history?
Yeah, let me stay with that thought for a second, Rick. And survivors are so central to how we tell this story. Can you talk about the importance of their voices and how that's influenced your work and what's happening here?
Well, the only reality check that we have as to what really took place there is what the survivors remembered and what they were willing to share. Some of them were quite graphic, and what the stories they told us, the horrible things that happened to them when they were young children. But there was also a sense of resiliency because they're still here, they're still plugging away, they're involved in their communities, they're trying to help people heal. So it's a dual story of trauma and resiliency, and they kind of go back and forth throughout the whole history of the Institute.
Tim, when you unveiled Tim and Rick and other community leaders, when you unveiled the National Academy for Indigenous Relations, you shared some of those stories in the form of art, and I thought that you did it masterfully, Tim. It's always a balancing act between. I mean, it's hard. It's a hard story to tell, but then there's beauty embedded in there too. How do you balance those seemingly inherent conflicts?
Well, as Rick mentioned, that whole idea of resilience is central to this, right? Because the survivors came through these experiences, and yet in crafting the exhibition script and content, Rick and the team, did a great job showing throughout all of the trauma and drama that took place there, how the children sort of fought back, what they did to retain their integrity, their humanity throughout the process. And so, we really kind of worked, from what the survivors told us. Rick spent many meetings with them. I did a subsequent phase on heritage aspects. and met with the survivors several times. We did walkthroughs of the building to gain the stories of what took place in each and every room in that facility. And but the fact that they were there walking us through those issues, even within these meetings, still, tearing up, right? I mean, these are pretty dramatic memories, still tearing up and all of that, but nevertheless, the courage that they showed and helping to convey that information to us so we could then, provide the visual interpretation, the exhibition interpretation to bring those stories out, I think was really central to all of the work.
It's powerful. As you're getting these powerful stories, Tim, you have to make choices on what is and isn't going to be in the exhibit. How did you make those choices from so much to work with?
Well, we work from the word truth, right? So the idea was to tell the truth about what these stories were, what the experiences were that were being conveyed by the survivors. So we are in this era, I think, still of truth and reconciliation, and that really is key. What really happened? What went on? What does the testimony tell us? And I don't think, Rick, we pulled back too much on these stories.
You also have to remember, though, Carl, the current survivors, their memory goes back to about 1940. We have a whole 120 years more of a story to tell. So we had to dig around the archival record to try to find any trace of the stories of the children who went there. So it's a very long, complicated story. You know, this is Canada's oldest running residential school and closed till 1970. So trying to be fair to that, what we did when we interviewed survivors or take a look at other recollections, we looked for what are the common themes. And there were about 7 different ideas that keep reoccurring. Things like the discipline was harsh, they were so lonely, the food was bad, that kind of stuff. And so then we focused the exhibit around those common themes that we thought played through time. Now, any exhibit, no matter what you do, it's kind of like you're a curator detective. You got to examine the facts. You have to sometimes triangulate things, and then at the same time, it's an editing job. You can't tell everything, so we try to tell the most powerful stories in the time and space that we have.
I think, if I could, Carl, I think yeah. Rick, you started some of the research as early as 2018, somewhere around there, and so over the course of some 7 years, our crew, we're making literally millions of decisions, right? As we think about and take on all of the content, everything from the content itself, the script, the visuals, the interpretation, all of that. It's amazing the level of work that it takes place to pull something like this together.
I can't say enough how much I respect both of you professionally and personally for your contributions to our people. Tim, I am curious for people that are able to attend on September 30th and afterwards, what they can expect and how, are you allowed to tell us things? How much can you tell us about what exactly is going to be there?
Well, the sort of the launch, if you will, of the facility on National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, will be an unveiling of the facility. It won't be fully complete yet. I think that's important for people to understand. There's a couple sections of the facility and the exhibition that won't be there yet. But I think it's going to be pretty dramatic and pretty powerful. And I think Rick can probably speak a bit more to the the positioning of the Mohawk Institute as one of the only sort of exhibitions within one of the previous facilities that's been done within Canada. And so this truly does become a historic site, a heritage site, and as we know now, it's formally documented as an international site of conscience. But Rick, I was just wondering how many other facilities like this may exist within Canada.
I've been able to find many. We did a hard look in the beginning. and consulted with other institutions that deal with trauma. And but each place has its unique story. The Mohawk Institute is very unique, even in terms of residential schools. So you had to tell its story. We looked hard at the place. Think of it, Carl, as the building is the largest artifact that was left behind, and the building contains memory. The building witnessed all the stuff that we're talking about, and so we draw upon that. And during the renovations, it was very interesting to me that hundreds of objects were revealed in the floorboards behind the wall. It was almost as if the building was trying to say, consider this, look at this, remember this. So we've tried to minimize the exhibition look within the building. We're going to walk you through what the students went through when they first arrived, the things that happened to them. We'll take you to the dorms where they stayed or where some abuse took place. We'll take you to where they worked, like the laundry room and the dining hall, and then we'll take you to the classroom and kind of recreate what it was like for them. But we also have to have a warning. I mean, some of this is very harsh. Some of the moments, some of the places they still resonate with this feeling of what the kids suffered. And we got to remember this generally only went up to 8th grade for most of its history. These are very young kids. It was only later, towards the end, it developed a high school program. And so we don't know how many children went through there. And it's not just children from Six Nations. They came from all across Ontario and Quebec. In fact, towards the end, when it closed, the majority of kids were from elsewhere. So it's not just a Haudenosaunee or Six Nations story. It really is a story that should resonate across the country.
I am curious, Rick. You've been doing this kind of work for a while, though nothing quite like this. This is a very special project. But emotionally, how does this impact you after all these years of doing this kind of work? Do these stories still connect to you on a personal level?
Yeah, I know it's kind of ironic that I taught in Indigenous studies for 20 years, 25 years, and you deal with all the stories of horror and betrayal and all of this stuff. But this finally hit home because of the fact that when I found the name of my relatives that went there, just by luck, I didn't go there because my family moved away from the reserve. And then when you see the legacy of it all, it helped me understand why we have the kind of dysfunctions we have in our community and why our people are the way they are because of what took place there. So taking a look at historical trauma and taking a look at all of the stuff that happens, yeah, it kind of put me in a big emotional knot for a while because it's such a powerful story. You want to make sure you do justice to the story, but also the three of us, we're the living legacy of that. I can't tell you how many Dockstedters and Johnson's names are in the registry of I went to school here. So all of us are tied directly to what took place in that school.
Tim, I'm gonna ask you a very similar question. You've been very fortunate to have had the opportunity to help our people with so many projects and all across Turtle Island, from your journalism work to your work with the Smithsonian and beyond. But this project just feels different and a little personal. I wonder if you could speak to how it's impacting you emotionally.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I'm coming up on almost 10 years since I retired from the Smithsonian, and the idea that I had at that time was to come back to the community, Six Nations of the Grand River, and this historic region of Niagara, where so much of history played out, and get involved and make some contributions there. I did not envision getting involved in this Mohawk Institute project at that time. It just kind of came around, and but I do consider it a really powerful legacy project, right? Kind of at the zenith of some of the work that Rick and I have done over the years because of the significance of the message. So emotionally, again, our family is interwoven with this story. Our kids have been helped, partly raised by one of the survivors. It's very close to us, and so I'm very happy to be involved. And I should mention that we're actually telling the story of the Mohawk Institute through several different media. There's the exhibition itself. We have self-guided audio tour with handsets you can listen to as you go through the exhibition. Those turned out to be phenomenal. We have a book exhibition guidebook coming out. We're working on a website component for this exhibition. I don't know, what have I missed, Rick? But several components to help tell the story.
Yeah, we're also going to have a virtual exhibition online based upon the story. 'Cause, you know, you can't put everything in the wall, so sometimes to explore more depth. So this really is a major educational initiative that the Woodland Center is embarked on. But I think it would also be quite telling to our community, and it's going to be an ongoing living thing. The minute you do this, people will bring more stories forward, more photographs of survivors, more people will be willing to share. To coincide with this, I worked with a group of historians, and we just published a book about the Mohawk Institute that will be available at the time of the opening as well. So it's a full court press to say, let's take a hard look at what this place means. Let's explore that truth that Tim was talking about, and let's think deeply, all of us, both the Indigenous community and then the colonizer community. We have to think about what this means. And because I noticed some people are kind of getting tired of hearing about residential schools and TRC, but the lingering impact on all sides is still here. We still have to deal with that. And, you know, I would say Canadians have been traumatized by residential schools. I can't tell you how many people I met said, oh my God, I didn't know this. And it's kind of like, how could you not know what happened in your own backyard? But they didn't know, just as my family didn't know growing up, or they didn't want to talk about it. So we have to face each other and start this new dialogue about what does all of this mean, not to victimize people or to make them feel guilty, but now let's move past guilt and shame on all sides, and let's explore ways, if we're ever going to build the kind of relationships that our ancestors envisioned in the true role wampum, if we're ever going to build that kind of thing, we got to deal with the unresolved grief from the Mohawk Institute.
Tim, I saw you nodding along, and I just wonder if you had anything to add to that sentiment.
Well, yeah, I think in terms of giving your audience an understanding of the full scope of this work, the Woodland Cultural Center is also going to be displaying an exhibition of R.G. Miller's artwork. He was a survivor of the Mohawk Institute who had very traumatic experiences that he is reflecting through his artwork. And so one section of the building has been converted into an art gallery, and his work will be appearing there. And then Rick and the team also prepared a book about Gary Miller, R.G. Miller, and the artwork and the exhibition as well, that we hope to have sometime soon available for the public. So many different things are happening at the same time here as we shoot for September 30th.
Let me, and I'm going to ask both of you a variation of this question. We've been talking about the truth for the last 15 minutes or so. Reconciliation has become a bit of a loaded word, and it means something different to so many different people. I'm curious about each of your perspectives on where this project fits in the context of reconciliation, where we stand as a people now in the context of reconciliation, and what conversations could look like. I'll leave it broad, answer it however you want to. I'll ask you first, Tim.
Well, this speaks to the reasons for a new organization that Rick and I and Phil Davis and Michelle Sue have developed. It's called the Niagara Academy for Indigenous Relations. And this taps in pretty directly with the question you just asked, is where do we go from here? Where are we at the present time, and where do we go from here? And so the focus on Indigenous relations is a significant part of that. Reconciliation is not a word that I seek to move away from. It's embedded within a significant Canadian process. A lot of folks talk about restoration and things of this nature. But I think, really focusing on relations and how to develop these tools. And, we see it even within the Niagara region. There's still a lot of ignorance ignorance, inexistence, and naivete, even within some major agencies and institutions with Niagara. And it's just so glaring and, so shocking in some respects that we think we've got to bring together some of the most significant and serious Indigenous people who are out there, who go back in the work, 30, 40 years, and make sure we're carrying forward the core principles that we come into the work, upon that sort of trajectory, and developing all number of programs. So, publications and whatnot. So the book on R.G. Miller's work, for example, is supported by Niagara Academy for Indigenous Relations. We're getting involved in other things. Rick's out there lecturing. I'll be doing some presentations later this year as well. So a lot's going to be coming forward on that particular front, including our management of the Valor and Victory event at Queenston Heights Park on November 8th. Rick?
Well, I think in my academic life, I've been taught at the University of Buffalo for many years and came over to Polytechnic and McMaster. It's always been about reconciliation. But the idea would be we're trying to help the people, both our people as well as those outside of our community, understand the nature of colonization and racism and how harmful it is. And so we're trying to help people rethink their own stance to do less harm. And so that way, reconciliation is never going to end. There's always going to be the need to do this. But I think we got some hopeful sites. Look at how many people did donate to the Save the Evidence campaign. How much money was put into it by the federal government and the agencies and the corporations. So I would say that the reopening of the Mohawk Institute, this time where the natives are telling the story, is going to be met with a lot of anticipation, because everybody's carrying those kind of questions. Carl, what are we going to do about this? What does this mean? So now we're going to provide you with even more evidence and some more direction, but it's also an emotional journey. It's not just for your head to figure out, but it's really a matter of changing attitudes you have about Native people, changing the way you interact with them, and also changing the idea that somebody knows better what we should be doing. And so we're presenting not only the Woodland Center is being managed by Indigenous people, but the exhibition being managed with Tim and I. So we're trying to show that strong Indigenous voice to analyze what happened to our people, to try to figure out then where do we move forward. But we're still doing it with an alliance. Even the exhibit developers we work with, this exhibit has transformed their lives because they heard about residential schools and, but now that they've been involved in actually helping to tell that story. So let's just say, I think the Mohawk Institute reinstallation will be an opportunity in which we create a new kind of partnership about what does it mean to be a Canadian? What does it mean to be an Indigenous person surrounded by Canadians? And then how are we going to resolve the difference? Rather than meeting out in the middle of the road and shouting at each other, there's got to be other ways in which we can draw upon that great, great treaty tradition, whether it's the Treaty of Niagara of 1764 or the Turo Wampum, to say that peace, respect, and friendship are the ultimate goals of what we're after here, even with this exhibition.
Tim, what do you think of all these messages?
Well, yeah, of course, I agree completely with everything that Rick just said. I think in terms of this particular project with the Mohawk Institute, we just have to recognize, acknowledge, respect, and express our gratitude to the survivors for all of the work that they've put forward. And what we've been doing is provide, sort of applying our professional skills to bring these stories forward. But, kudos to all of the survivors who are involved in this project.
Let me. I hope to ask you each just one last question. You've been very generous with your time. Something I've been thinking about with this interview, and Tim, I think I'll ask you first. Rick, of course, I'm curious about what you have to say. There are young Indigenous people that are watching this, young men, women, non-binary, gendered people saying, how do we help? How do we make sure that these stories we lost John Elliott Gaunt this year, and we lost Bud White-Eye Gaunt, and in our own families, of course, we feel this pain. How are we making sure that this legacy continues on? And specifically for young Indigenous people watching, what can they do to carry this legacy forward, Tim?
Well, I think don't be shy about getting involved, right? I would suggest that all of us can think back to our younger years and how it is that we got involved in the work. Of course, it begins with connections to family and stories within our families that made us curious and things of that nature. My great uncle Emerson Hill was a Confederacy chief, and it's always one of those things where you wish he was still alive so you could learn more from what his experiences were. But many of us have these stories within our families. But the important thing is to get involved. Really seek out individuals, organizations, groups that are doing some work, and ask some questions. Don't be shy about getting out there and asking questions. Some of my earliest work was actually to interview elders, that we published back in the Turtle Quarterly magazine, the newsletter, and things of that nature. Geez, that goes back 40 years now or something, But that's how I sort of got started, and then the curiosity builds, the knowledge builds over time. But I think that's really critically important. And Rick also is such an icon, really, a figure, as somebody who's done extensive research in so many subjects that there's a lot to learn from folks like Rick, myself, and others who've been at this for a long time.
Yeah, so moving forward, so there's a lot of things that need to be dismantled, a lot of institutional racism, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, then my message to young Indigenous people is do those things that define you. Plant some corn, learn some Mohawk, go to the ceremonies, joyfully dance, and then stop the lateral violence in our communities. Let's protect our women and our children. Stop gossiping about each other. Let's put an end to this false animosity between the Anishinaabeg and the Haudenosaunee people. Let's live indigenously, the joy of being Indigenous. That's what the Mohawk Institute tried to destroy. So if we want to be the antidote to that, we have to learn how to celebrate what it means to be us. And yes, I grew up not knowing any of this stuff. I had a long journey to find out about our ceremonies, our government. But the last 12 years, we've been doing this recitation of the Great Law of Peace. And it's been my responsibility to help to talk about decolonization, or what they say, untangling our minds. And in there, then we say, yes, it's time to look in the mirror. What kind of person am I? How do I treat other people? How do I use these great thoughts about peace and love to change my relationship to people, change my relationship to the earth, change my relationship to my family to make it more constructive and positive? So to me, those are the things that we do. And it doesn't take an apology from the Pope or for the King to set that in motion. We can do that right now. And to tell you the truth, it doesn't cost any money to go out and plant some corn. So I think by these things coincide, rebuilding our indigeneity and what the cultural centers do, what the urban centers do, what the Native university programs do, is all part of that rebuilding. So we are a stronger people now than when I was born in 1950 because of all of this stuff. And so we're well on our way of recovering, but we just got to get past some of this lateral violence and the bullying that still inhibits our people from wanting to joyfully express what it means to be Indigenous.
And colonial attitudes. So I think the other thing that's happening in this day and age is that we are recognizing our agency and utilizing and applying our agency, and not stepping back when we see institutions, agencies, and organizations sort of doing things that are so off the mark, that we just sit back and accept it. Those days are gone. And I think through the Niagara Academy for Indigenous Relations, through work that's being done at the Woodland Cultural Center, the redevelopment of the Mohawk Institute, all of this is a reflection of the agency now that we're putting forward and telling our own stories and taking control of our own situation. Rick and I have done a lot of research and work on the War of 1812 era, coming through that. And, from a time when our nations were working nation to nation with the crown, to by the 1830s, when that started to shift towards this policy of wardship towards Indigenous peoples. We've been fighting this now for a couple hundred years, but I think we've reached a point where we're turning the corner on this now.
When you use that word agency, Tim, I think of, it was actually Chandra who was giving a presentation, and she used the term gazenstansla. I think it's a little different in Mohawk, but on Oneida it's gazenstansla, and we've interpreted that as power, but she actually talked about capacity, and so just to stick with young people for a little bit, because I think we're on a really good wavelength here. They echoing what Rick said about, whether it's planting corn or learning Mohawk or Skurure or Anyata Aga or all the languages that are out there. Like there's so much opportunity to build that agency. And I wonder, I don't know, you just moved me, Tim. I wonder if you could just speak to it a little bit more.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's just something that we now are going to exercise that authority that we have, unapologetically. And not just bare our heads when we see nonsense going on out there, and it's still out there. But you're right, and going back to what Rick said, we're looking at the capacity that's developed over the last 40 years or so. It's pretty significant, right? In our own communities. Like I live here in the heart of Six Nations of the Grand River in Ashwegan, and have the opportunity to witness all of the agencies and organizations that are functioning here. And they've become quite professionalized, and more functional than they used to be. Still some work to be done, but a lot of really great, incredible work, and that's partly because the capacities have grown, the attitudes have grown, our sense of respect for each other is growing. We still need to work on that, but all of these elements are coming together now. And I think it creates an exciting new era, actually, right? Where you're going to be hearing, such as the work that Rick and I are doing at the Mohawk Institute with the survivors, you're going to be hearing stories from ourselves, from our people. And that's fascinating, we had the Indigenous Niagara Outstanding Achievement Awards just a couple of weeks ago. What a beautiful environment in that room, right? Just fantastic. As we, again, what were we doing? We were recognizing, acknowledging, and respecting each other, and you can feel the vibe. You could feel the vibe in that room, and we were doing that. And so, I think that's our commitment, particularly to young people, is to help them transition into positions of power.
I love that sentiment. I wonder if you have anything you could add to that, Rick.
Part of agency is responsibility. So it is, because sometimes we get caught in it's our right to do this, and we demand recognition of our rights. But what our original instructions are is accepting our responsibility to conduct ourselves in a good way, even in how we interact with other people. So I see that as the next era of what we're doing, is that we're finally accepting responsibility for who we are and what we do. So you see more Indigenous justice programs, you see more Indigenous child welfare agencies, because we're trying to be responsible. We've got a lot of wounds and a lot of problems to fix up from the past, but it's that idea, we're not waiting now for a white savior on a white horse to come riding in and with his white feather make everything go away. So when you accept that responsibility, you also have to accept the hard work that goes along with it. And sometimes that hard work is dealing with elders who maybe aren't as nice and cooperative as you wish they were, because a lot of them actually went to the residential school. They're still carrying that sting as well. So the advice they give to our chiefs is you have to have skin that is 7 layers thick. That's the same advice they give to young people. Don't let those harsh words, those racist words, those bullying words get to your heart. You have to deflect those and keep moving forward. Otherwise, we are our own worst enemies. R.G. Miller one time said he didn't like the word survivor. He says, I'm not sure we've survived this, because a whole lot of our people didn't. A number of them passed away there. A lot of them drank themselves to death afterwards, or lived a lifestyle that was pretty harmful. What was it that turned the people around? And when you listen to the current generation of survivors, that's what they taking responsibility for my life. Learning that I have to get rid of that cloak of shame that I carried. At the same time, I think a lot of them said, I didn't realize I was passing this same kind of oppression onto my own children. So when we realize all of that, then we gotta take a deep breath and say, let's stop doing that now. If you're part of that chain, that negative legacy of the residential schools, you got to stop that, change your behavior, and no longer perpetuate that. It's easy to say, I know that, but I think that's where our generation is headed towards. With all of the healing taking place, we've become the stage is set to produce, I think, a very strong generation of people, but it takes that resolve, that tenacity to move forward.
And on the point of youth, Carl, I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank you, because you're a generation behind. Thank you for all of the work that you've done over the years in communicating Indigenous issues, having open conversations about even some very difficult topics. You've become one of our experts in contemporary Indigenous issues, and an outstanding broadcaster as well, and educator. So I want to thank you also for the work that you're doing.
Nyawako, Tim, I really appreciate it. Though an interviewer's job is to pivot back to each of you. So I'll just ask you each one last question, and we got just about 2 or 3 minutes left here. So maybe if you could take a minute each. And if there's anything I haven't asked you about, or any final thought that you want to leave our listeners with, Tim, I'll stick with you, and then Rick, if you want to give us the last words.
Well, these are indeed exciting times, and I do have to acknowledge the rollout of the truth and reconciliation work that Canada has done. I've had the opportunity, Rick as well, to work with a number of institutions, agencies, municipalities, and even a lot of municipalities have really come forward in recent years to say, what can we do? What should we do? And this is why you're seeing a number of Indigenous legacy sites, public parks, memorials emerging within the Niagara region. And it came through those questions by civic leaders wondering what can they do. So I think these are still exciting times that way. And what we're doing with the Niagara Academy for Indigenous Relations is now sort of weaving together many of these place-based learning destinations into something that's much more powerful, that we can bring to the public in future years in the ways of seminars, symposia, retreats, conferences, tours, things of that nature. So publications in particular, both Rick and I have a long history of directing and publishing works. So that remains a central part of it too, because there needs to be a solid intellectual foundation to what we do, soundly based in research and knowledge. So I do think we're leaning into some very interesting times.
Do you have any final thoughts, Rick?
Yes, do it all. Go see the exhibit, read all of the labels, watch all of the media intently, go online, there'll be 3 new publications, including that Behind the Bricks book from the University of Calgary Press. That there's a lot to be learned, and now we're offering it to you kind of on a golden platter. Here it is. Here's the best of the thinking that we've come up with in our generation as to what this place means.
Rick Hill, I'll see you at the 27th at the Wild Rice event, and then I'll see you on the 30th. Tim, I'll see you on the 30th as well. Biggest now go up for me and on behalf of our listeners. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I want to you too, Carl.
Yeah,
Anna.
Carl.
Nagitwa.